Excel is one of the most popular accounting programs ever. Whether it is actually the best, we will clarify in this video. And to answer this question, whether it is the best accounting program, we should first, even if it sounds a bit theoretical at first, answer the question, what is accounting actually? Because it's not entirely clear. I still remember my mom, whom I greet in case you ever watch this video, who would sit down once a year and say, I'm doing my taxes now. And taxes, for her were, I write invoices. I record incoming invoices. I record payments. I possibly do some travel expense reports. I do depreciations. I create a profit and loss statement from that. I do my income tax return, my VAT return, and so on. And the phrase, I do my bookkeeping, is just as undifferentiated because we do our bookkeeping in a variety of different ways. What is still relatively normal is that we usually somehow create an invoice if we don't receive credit notes. And you can write your invoice in Excel, no problem. That means for this part of bookkeeping, Excel is not a problem. You will also find a template, an Excel template, in the video description below. With it, you can write an invoice in the future. A little reminder, we are transitioning and the e-invoice is being introduced. In the future, it will be a bit more difficult with the Excel templates. But as of today, you can write your invoices in Excel without any problems, but that's not the entire accounting because that's when the work really begins. Your incoming invoices are a small part of your accounting and the invoices you receive. That means the incoming invoice book, and then you pay the invoice and hopefully get yours paid as well. That means we have the incoming invoice, and the bank account. Under certain circumstances, we also have fixed assets. But what we mainly have is what the tax office wants. The tax office wants a profit determination from us, and there are two different types of it. If you're interested in the topic, I've recorded a detailed video on it, on the topic of accounting for freelancers. I'll link it in the top right. Here we won't cover the absolute basics. What's important is that there are two different types of accounting. One is the income surplus calculation, which is relatively simple. You basically just go and look at what actually happened in the bank account. So what money inflows and outflows were there? And that is structured a bit. And then you have an income surplus calculation. This is the simple type of accounting. And you can use this simple type of accounting if you are a freelancer or a business owner, but you make less than 80,000 euros in profit and have less than 800,000 euros in revenue. This means if you are below both limits, you can create an income surplus calculation. If you are a business owner and, for example, make over 80,000 euros in profit, or even if you have a corporation, then you must do a more complex form of accounting, namely balance sheet accounting. And the result of this more complex accounting is a balance sheet and a profit and loss statement. The whole process is more complex. Consider the performance date and the payment date. On balance sheet, receivables and liabilities are reported, and so on. To make it short, you should not attempt this complex form of accounting. Please, under no circumstances, try to do it with Excel. There are so many pitfalls. There are so many things you can do wrong. It's best not to even try. The risk of doing something wrong and then having significant tax problems is relatively high. But if you are doing the simple form of accounting, like a cash basis accounting, by the way, you can find a free template for this in the video description below. Feel free to check it out. Then the temptation is there to just enter it manually. Because cash basis accounting is ultimately nothing more than listing the income and expenses of a year. Of course, a cash basis accounting can also become quite complex at some point. So if you had 1,000 bank accounts in a year, then it's relatively difficult to compile that in a simple Excel spreadsheet. But maybe you are self-employed on the side. You write 1 or 2 invoices a month and have 3 expenses. And then, of course, the question arises, do I need to get a proper accounting program for these 5 account transactions per month? And honestly, I have to answer this question on 2 levels. Namely, the purely practical level. If your self-employment is really that straightforward, with 20, 30, 40, maybe 50 transactions per year, you have a basic organizational system that you manage well and are also a tidy person who can maintain this system consistently. And very importantly, you have a separate business account, meaning where you handle all business matters. You have a bank account, and very importantly, you don't have to submit VAT returns during the year. Either because you are exempt from VAT or because you are a small business owner, then you don't have to during the year. Submit any preliminary VAT returns. Then I have to say practically, you probably won't have any issues with bookkeeping in Excel. That means you could do it that way. This brings us to the second level on which one must answer the question of whether you can do your bookkeeping with Excel. The answer is yes. You can if your self-employment is really small and you have such an overview system, then you could do it. But the answer is also you shouldn't do it. In Germany, there are rules about how bookkeeping must look. That is, how the tax office wants you to do your bookkeeping, and these rules are called GoBD. GoBD is the abbreviation for, and I have to read this, Principles for the Proper Management and Storage of Books, Records and Documents in Electronic Form. And there are a few things regulated there that you can't easily handle with Excel, or only with, a considerable additional effort. In Excel, you can handle with Excel. And specifically, the points I'm talking about are that your bookkeeping must be traceable. It must be verifiable, it must be complete, and of course, it must be correct. You must record business transactions promptly. You need a certain order, and it must be unchangeable. By the way, I have also recorded a separate video on the topic of GoBD. I'll link it for you in the top right corner. With Excel, you often have a problem with immutability and traceability. This means that once you have recorded something in Excel, it should actually be possible to trace what you have booked there as long as the retention period is ongoing. And you should not be able to overwrite it in such a way that I can no longer trace it. So I must be able to trace not only the final result, but also the actual work in the accounting. This means if you have taken a Deutsche Bahn receipt and recorded it as advertising expenses, and then later you realized, these are travel expenses, then you probably corrected this entry. And you must not simply delete this originally incorrect entry as you would in Excel, but you have to reverse it in another entry, essentially setting it back to 0 in order to then make the correct entry with a third entry. Then, even years later, an outsider can trace what was actually done. And the whole thing must not be stored in an open, editable Excel file, but must be finalized. This is also the reason why all accounting programs, such as Lexware or Selfdest, finalize the entries. And you can only cancel them and not simply delete them. The problem is Excel always allows you to do the whole thing. As mentioned, there are ways to make it irreversible by regularly saving it in a DMS system and finalizing it that way. Or by printing it out each time and filing it in paper form, then it is also traceable that every processing step is not so easily deletable. But honestly, if you're going to go to that effort, then you might as well get an accounting program. In plain terms, this means you should not do your accounting with Excel, unless you undertake this exorbitantly large additional effort. Honestly, it's probably not worth it to do it that way, because before you spend money on a DMS system, you'd better spend money on a proper accounting program that archives and finalizes your documents properly. If your accounting is small, and you are a small business owner, you can fly a bit under the radar. And in my personal experience, the tax office will not give you any trouble. However, I cannot guarantee that. But that's just the core of accounting. If you've been self-employed for a while, then you know there are so many other things you need to take care of. Whether it's making payments, keeping some statistics about the customers you have, or tracking individual projects. How are things going with your self-employment? If you have 3 projects, how are the individual projects going and not just the whole small business? If you need to account for travel expenses to bill the customer further. And all these topics somehow also belong to the subject of accounting. Not accounting in the narrow sense, but in the broadest sense. These are tasks that somehow also belong to your accounting. And for that, you can of course use Excel, but even then, you should always keep in mind to save things in an unchangeable way. So if in doubt, print it out. And you can also print it out as a PDF. So save it as a PDF, which makes it unchangeable for the time being. If you have any questions on the topic, feel free to ask them in the comment section below. And I'll try to help you further. And if you're now thinking, yes, Excel, it's nice in theory, but I'd rather use an accounting program or maybe a tax advisor, then check out my recommendations in the video description below or just click right here. And now you should definitely subscribe to the channel so you won't miss anything in the future if there are any changes in tax law. It happens sometimes. Or you can simply watch one of the other videos, for example, this one or this one.